Hey students, welcome back to another week. We are really shifting gears this week and next week. Up until this point, we've been talking about research and what it means to find your own research and how to write about research. And really, we've really circled around this whole theme of what is the truth. We are still on that theme. We're still talking about those important questions. And this week, we're going to dive into the literature component of this course. And we're going to be reading An Enemy of the People. I've uploaded a PDF to your weekly folder as well as your essays and handouts and that section on the left-hand side of your toolbar. So be sure to take a look at that and download it. But before we really jump into the play, we first need to talk about how to read literature. What does this look like for you? What are some good tools to put in your tool belt as you navigate how to go about this? So to begin, reading is something that we all practice daily. We read newspapers, magazines, novels, textbooks, but reading a newspaper is really different than strategically reading literature. For one thing, the purpose for reading is different, and so the methods are going to vary. You can feel that reading is a simple task, and some of you were probably like, I love reading on the beach, or I love reading on a Sunday afternoon. I've read 20 books this year. But it's really, really different when you're trying to read critically. It's different when you are trying to examine characters and you're trying to think of themes and you're thinking about historical context and what does this mean when I apply it to the world that we're living in today. So these are just a few points that can help you as we begin reading An Enemy of the People. So the first thing I want to encourage you to do is read carefully. This is not a time for speed reading and it's not a time for skimming. Careful reading definitely takes longer. It's going to take you more time to read this. It's going to take you more time to make notes and to sit there and think critically about the things you just read. But ultimately, you're going to save more time than if you have to go back and reread the discussions that we're going to be doing. It's going to require that you really know who these characters are and that you remember things that they did in the plot and you're considering their perspectives and you're considering themes and symbols. And so it's important that you read it closely the first time so that you're not having to go back and reread those things. Begin reading the play immediately. Don't wait until Wednesday. And this allows you more time to read slowly and to give attention to the smaller details. Don't skip lectures. I can't stress this enough. The way that I'm going to go about this is you're going to be doing a discussion board on Wednesday where you're going to post your initial ideas and thoughts. And then I will be posting my lecture for Act 1 and so forth on Thursday after you've done those initial posts. It's so pivotal that you watch those even after you've posted. There are going to be things that you probably missed. There are going to be things that maybe you didn't fully understand about the text that I'm going to address. There's going to be a lot about the historical context that maybe you didn't catch on to. And then I'm going to be mentioning those ideas in the next discussion board the next week. So don't skip out. Make sure you're making time for that. Listen to the key passages that I mentioned. If I tell you a certain part of the play, scroll back to that part and take a look at it and re-examine it. Take notes. And write down questions to add to the discussion boards. The discussion boards are a really great tool to cultivate really good conversation. And so as you're reading, if you have questions or if I mention something in the lecture that you still don't understand, write those questions down. They're really important. Engage with the story. Ask yourself, what would you do if you were in the same position as the character in the text? In this text, we're going to be specifically talking about two brothers, Dr. Stockman and Peter Stockman. And these brothers have very different goals, personalities, and motivations. And so it's really important that you just consider what would you be doing? How would you be acting? What reactions and responses would you have? And try to put yourself in his or her place and question the thoughts and the actions and the motivations. Really consider, why would they be acting this way? Did they have a choice? What would be the alternative? There's some really good things to consider when you're looking from the character's perspective. Identify and understand the conflict. Ask yourself, what is the main problem that's facing these characters? How is that revealed? Do they ever overcome the issue? If so, how? If not, why? Ask yourself, why did this even happen in the first place? And what is the author's purpose? And we talk about this a lot when we talk about the writing process, purpose and audience. And that's just as critical and important to consider as you're reading literature. Ask yourself about the purpose of the text. Ask yourself, what audience were they trying to speak to, and why? Why would they be trying to convey this particular message? What that's going to do is it's going to tell you a lot about the history. It's going to tell you a lot about what's going on in the time period. Identify and understand the theme. What is the main idea of the story, the play, the novel? What is the author's message? Is there a lesson they're trying to teach, or how is this lesson taught? Which characters do they use and why? And this kind of goes back to identifying and understanding the conflict, but really just ask yourself, what is the purpose here? And then finally, these are some more growth mindset, personal things to consider. Be persistent and be positive. If you're going to be critical, do it with some intelligence. Many works of literature start out slow, and this play is no exception. It can seem dull and it can seem confusing, and sometimes reading this kind of literature just gets really frustrating. But I think what you're going to find is that you're going to be pleasantly surprised by some of the ideas that you have to consider, and thinking about when this play was written and why it still applies and how it applies to the world that you're living in today. There's nothing wrong with not liking the work, but if you have criticism, make sure that you're thinking of it intellectually. If you think that it's not believable, if you don't like how the writer portrays a certain character, if you don't like the writer's decisions, if something creates too much emotion, those are things that of course you can comment on, but try to avoid comments like "this sucks" or "this is boring." Really examine yourself in this process and ask yourself, is this because I don't care about these things, and why do I not care about these things? And give a real self-evaluation as you're reading the text and as you're reading the literature. Research. Again, we go back to this concept that we've been talking about all semester. Do a little research on the author. This text was originally written by Henrik Ibsen, or Ibsen, excuse me, and it was translated by Arthur Miller and reinvented at a later date. Look a little bit into that. Ask yourself why that might be. Consider the historical time periods that they were written in. You don't necessarily have to deep dive. You don't need to be going and looking at scholarly journals here at the beginning, but just doing a little primary research yourself, and just figuring out why this text was written in the first place, and some of the really good questions that people were asking as this text was originally published. And then this is just something really tangible. Set goals. Know how the play is divided and make it a goal to read one section in one setting. Set a goal to when the assignment should be completed. So for example, this week you're going to be reading Act 1. I would encourage you to read all of Act 1 at the same time. Try to space out a time when you can ensure you can do that, because you're going to understand the story better if you read it all in one setting. And then that still allots some time for you to go back and really critically examine some things and ask some questions and highlight some things that maybe you want to go over again. And then just remember, practice makes perfect. Get out of the habit of thinking that reading is something you just do for school. The more you read literature in and out of school, the easier and more enjoyable it's going to become. Read other stories in the anthology that you bought for a literature class. Ask friends for book recommendations and get reading. Guys, the thing about literature is more often than not, it's tied to these deeper moral lessons and these themes and principles that we often don't like to have conversations about because it's sticky or it's too political or it socially is just really challenging. But what it does is it creates this really safe space for us to be able to do that. So as we're reading and some things are coming up and really challenging and difficult topics come to the surface, I want to really challenge you to dig into that and use the course and use the literature as a safe space to examine some of those things, including some of your own thoughts and biases. And again, it goes back to, if you were in these characters' positions, what would you be doing? How would you be responding? And what would your motivations be for those responses? I hope this helps you as you get started, and I hope it's a good way for you to navigate how to go about this. After you read the first act, then I want you to head to the discussion boards so that we can get started and cultivate a really good conversation this week. I hope you have a great week, and I'm looking forward to working with you again this week.